Welcome, and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. During question and answer, please press star 1 on your touch-tone phone. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you can disconnect at this time. Now we'll turn the conference over to Melissa Grasso. You may begin.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for joining us on today's webinar on accessing the European aerospace market and its supply chain. I'm Melissa Grasso. I'm currently the Global Aerospace Team Leader for the U.S. Commercial Service. We are the trade promotion agency under the U.S. Department of Commerce. You'll be hearing a little bit more about our agency later on in the presentation. Just a couple quick housekeeping items. We will be sending out the presentations and the recording of the presentation following the webinar. There will be a Q&A session following the presentations. You can also ask any questions. If you look at the top portion of your screen, there is a button that says Q&A, so you can type in any questions at that point. But again, we will be having a formal audio Q&A session at the end of the presentation. At this juncture, I'd like to turn the webinar over to Westworld Consulting.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Guy Hobday. I work for a company called Westworld Consulting in a business development and sales role. I'll be probably the main speaker in today's event, so I hope you don't nod off just my boring level of conjecture, but here we go. So briefly, Westworld is an organization that predominantly supports North American companies, mostly SME organizations that are looking to penetrate the European aerospace supply chain. We're here today to talk about that very subject and to give you some ideas and strategies on how you may wish to approach the market if you are already not here. So, can I hand you over sort of an outline of today's speakers? James Bledsoe is the International Trade Specialist in Arkansas. PJ Manor is the Commercial Specialist covering the aerospace and defence markets here in the UK and the US commercial section in London. I am me, and that's what I look like. Steve Hoskins, who's the General Manager and Head of Procurement for Airbus Simpa, is sitting to my left. And my colleague, Robbie Robertson, who's President and CEO of Westworld Associates, is somewhere driving in his car, and his phone hopefully is on mute, so he should be joining us at the appropriate time in this webinar. So the Q&A handouts will be available, I think, as Melissa said, towards the end of the session. The idea of this webinar is that it will last something like 50 minutes. We'll have a 15-minute Q&A section at the end. You're most welcome to contact me and maybe the US commercial section afterwards. My contact details you'll find at the very end if you have any questions that you'd like to raise which we can't cover in the event. So, can we move forward? So what is the webinar aimed at? It's predominantly aimed at you. You may well be an SME organization, as I said, US-based. We'd like to cover sort of 3 particular key areas within this webinar. You may well be an organization that is keen to sell your products and services here in Europe and have some experience or none at all. You may be an organization which is here, but your market is not growing as quickly as you otherwise wish it to be. Or you may simply like to know a little bit more about the European aerospace supply chain, how it works, who the major OEMs are, and some strategies and activities that you may wish to adopt if it's something you would do in the future. So what will we cover? The idea is to give you a very brief overview as to the aerospace market today. We'll talk about the supply chain in a little bit of detail. We'll give you some strategies that you may wish to adopt and best practices that you may wish to adhere to as far as approaching the market or when you're here considering doing so. We'll talk about typical challenges that you may already face or will face. Steve and I will have a sort of get-together informal interview with an Airbus employee. We'll talk about current projects or opportunities. We'll talk about routes to success, and the latter end of the presentation we'll talk in a little bit of detail about the value of attending the Farnborough Airshow. So now let me hand you back to the US Commercial Services and in particular to James and PJ.
Thank you very much. This is James Bledsoe with the U.S. Commercial Service. I'm based out of Little Rock, Arkansas. And for those of you who aren't aware of the U.S. Commercial Service, we are a branch of the government that falls under the Department of Commerce. What we do is we're charged by the executive branch with the duty of ensuring our national economic recovery and ongoing prosperity through assisting you, the U.S. businesses. How do we do this? Well, we promote and the export of goods and services from the U.S. with a focus of small to medium-sized businesses. We also represent business interests internationally, U.S. businesses, and we also businesses find qualified international partners. How do we do this? Well, we do this through our local offices, and each one of you listening should have a USIAC branch nearby you. From our offices, we can run some high-level HS code market research. We field trade leads. We do general Q&A. And my philosophy with my clients is the only dumb question is the question asked with regards to exporting. And if we can't provide the answer, we will find the person who can. We also run paid services, which are essentially business-to-business matchmaking and background checks. Primarily, we have the Gold Key Partner Match. There we will connect you with embassy personnel to help find you vetted, qualified buyers who know your product and want to start talking business with you. We also have the International Partner Search, which is similar to the Gold Key, but the only difference between the two, whereas the Gold Key you would travel in-country to meet your prospective business partners, the International Partner Search, you get to do this from your desk or wherever in the U.S. We also have the International Company Profile, which is essentially a background check on a prospective company you may be getting into business with. You want to check them out, make sure they're in good financial state, something we can help you out with. Things we also do, we also handle educational seminars via Export University brand seminars. We also arrange and host AES and BIS seminars, which is very pertinent to this industry. And we also offer counseling for those folks not exactly sure what they want to do or how to go about doing it in markets overseas. And then lastly, we also handle trade shows. We do things from industry-specific trade shows to U.S. pavilions. And with that, I will hand it over to P.J. Menner to explain the U.S. pavilions more.
Hi, I'm P.J. Menner, and I'm the Aerospace and Defense Specialist for the U.S. Commercial Service Office here in London, and I'm based at the U.S. Embassy. One of my roles is to help facilitate some of the services in the aerospace and defense sectors that James just mentioned. But I want to speak to you briefly on the activities that the Commercial Service is offering or endorsing at the Farnborough Airshow, which is being held, as you probably all know, 14 through 18 July. The show organizers are offering a Meet the Buyer program where you can reserve guaranteed face-to-face meetings with companies actively looking to buy. Over 35 major aerospace buyers participated in the Meet the Buyer program at the Farnborough 2012 show. There are currently 20 confirmed buyers, and the list is growing. Some of the bigger names participating will be Augusta Westland, China National Aviation Industry Corporation, Defense Science and Technology Laboratory, Frontier Airlines, Patent Air, and Thales UK. You can visit the Farnborough website or connect or contact me for further details on the Meet the Buyer program. Another program being offered at Farnborough is called the Global Chat program. The U.S. Department of Commerce is offering regional and global counseling to U.S. companies exhibiting at the show. There will be specialists from Japan, Spain, Italy, France, Czech Republic, Belgium, to help them develop a business plan that might increase their exports into those markets. You can also contact me for further details on that program. The final program that the Commercial Service is working on is it's still in the planning stages. We're working with GKN and Boeing on an aerospace sector briefing. This briefing will be held on the Tuesday of the show, but you have to check back with us, check our website for the latest details on this event. I'd just like to thank everybody for participating in this webinar, and I hope everyone gets something valuable out of it. Now back over to Guy.
Okay, thank you, PJ. Back to me. Let me just give you a very brief summary as to my background. As you might note from the grey hair or greying hair, I spent 26 years in the European aerospace market, and we at Westworld have been functioning in a support role to that organisation for some time. So let me start by outlining the defence and aerospace sector and what it looks like. In terms of its position, it's about the second largest in the world. It turns over something like $228 billion of revenue and employs circa 658,000 direct employees. So it is a large, complex market with lots of OEMs, and I understand maybe more first-tier large suppliers than currently there are in the US. As you would expect, there are some major players, the likes of Airbus, BA Systems, Necma, Safran, etc., all I'm sure you're well aware of. And the biggest, Airbus, contributes something like 31% of that 228 billion revenue in terms of its contribution to the market. And with a renamed Airbus Group, it consists of Airbus, the commercial aerospace side, Airbus Defence and Space, which was formerly Astrium and Cassidian, and Airbus Helicopters, which were formerly Eurocopter. So you can see that we are about half the size of your market, bearing in mind these are 2012 figures. In terms of our current growth, in the same year, the European aerospace market grew something like 5.1%, and the US market, sorry, the other way around, the European aerospace market grew by 7.9%, and the US market grew by about 5.1%. So it is a market that I think you should consider as far as diversification into other international markets. So why Europe? It's sizable, as I've already outlined. We are an international group of companies in terms of its portfolio. There are lots of US exports already in the marketplace. For example, France, UK and Germany were the third, fourth, seventh largest export markets for US products in 2012. And in the same year, there were 13 other European states in the top 50. So it is a market that could offer an increased sales activity for you and your businesses, and create, obviously, increased revenue terms. From a perspective of your industry, it'll give you maybe a more diverse client base. It'll give maybe your staff and you and your project managers an international feel to your company, and I hope it'll give an increased success as far as your portfolio of organisations and projects you currently work on. What does it look like? Well, the European aerospace and defence market is highly developed. We have OEMs that are challenging the incumbent first and second tier supply chain by looking to reduce the direct suppliers into them and ask those first and second tiers to manage the remaining. We have had, over the last 10 or 15 to 20 years, the introduction of the typical risk-sharing partner, in addition to the first-tier supplier. So it is a highly developed and complex market. It is truly global in terms of its international position, and there are always suppliers looking to either move up the supply chain and challenging the incumbents. It is competitive in terms of maybe a price structure and a cost base. It is conservative in terms of its approach to new suppliers. For example, we at Westworld are dealing with an organisation that approached us some 6 or 8 months ago. They are already in the market to a lesser degree. They met all approvals of Rolls-Royce, and then Rolls-Royce turned around and said, well, you have NADCAP, you have AS9000 Revision C, and actual fact, we are looking for another supplier in the domain that you offer. However, now you need to go through a supplier approval process, which in their case has taken 9 to 10 months to get through. And their comments to me were, Guy, hey, we've done all this, and then we still have to wait 9 or 10 months to get into Rolls-Royce. And I said, well, that'll be repeated probably every time you approach another potential client. However, there are opportunities. It is relatively open. The European aerospace market is relatively open. The benefits that U.S. companies have is that predominantly you're pricing your components or your products or services in dollars, and many European aerospace suppliers have a target of at least 50% of their revenues coming to them in dollars, either directly from European suppliers pricing in dollars or buying directly from the U.S. So slide 13 gives you a typical supply chain structure, the OEMs, and you'll see that those are familiar companies. I'm sure you're well aware of all or many of those OEMs. The first tiers and the risk-sharing partners, as I alluded to before, I believe we have more larger first-tier suppliers in the European aerospace market than maybe you do in the US. And then the typical second-tier suppliers that are managed by the first tier, and you can continue to build a pyramid. So it is a situation where new and challenging suppliers may wish to go to the OEMs, but they also may wish, and we would suggest this from a Westworld position, that they seriously consider whether it's better they go to the first and the second-tier suppliers as well as the OEM from the top down or from the bottom up. I talked about the global position, so this is just given to you as a fairly generic example. Actually, Steve Hoskins pointed out this is a slightly old slide, but it's just given to you as a flavour for the primes and the risk-sharing partners that Airbus have on the A350 XWB program, and that is just the aerostructures ones, doesn't cover systems, landing gear, etc., etc. So from a current perspective, Airbus, you will see from this slide, has a target of procuring something like 40% of its sourcing outside Western Europe by 2020. And you can see the massive increase in the US supply base that Airbus is trying to source in the same time frame. Yes, I'll readily admit, and I'm sure Steve will confirm, that many of that, or a lot of that, is related to the Mobile, Alabama A320 assembly line, but there may be opportunities outside that location and project that you could consider potentially being a supplier into. So let's touch upon a broad strategy which we would suggest from Westworld you ought to consider as far as positioning yourself in the European aerospace and defence market. As a company, we regularly get approached from organisations, and we sit down with them and we go through a fairly generic slide like this. Firstly, we talk about really evaluating what you're truly offering into the supply chain. What is it that you do different from the incumbents? Do you have a different material, a process, a method, certain IP rights that maybe the incumbent suppliers don't have? Are your USPs related to the European aerospace market than your incumbent? For example, one of our clients at Westworld came to us and scoped out their USPs, and one of them was that they are a women-owned minority company. And we sat down and evaluated what their value to the European aerospace market was, and it may be important to them in the US, but here we suggested to them there might be other USPs or unique selling points that they could consider more strong as far as their pitch to the incumbent OEMs, etc. We also suggest you seriously do your research as far as who those OEMs are and how they relate to your products and services, who your major competitors are here in Europe against those that you have in the US, what upcoming programs or opportunities are directly related to you as a company. Of those OEMs, what does this current supply chain look like? So who are their first and second tier and even third tier suppliers? And do as much networking as you possibly can. As I think PJ alluded to in his presentation, if you can go to the trade shows, whether it be Paris or Farnborough or ELA or various defence exhibitions around Europe, it's fairly critical to be here as much as you possibly can, as it would be in any other mature aerospace and defence market. And there's always a target that we have about managing expectations and reality. And I think Robbie will touch upon this probably latterly in his presentation about some of the direct opportunities he's currently dealing with. We at Westworld do get approached by companies that say, hey, Guy, simply get a meeting in front of Messier Doughty or Airbus or Rolls-Royce or Snecma, and I've worked for this company for 15 or 20 years, and I will simply do what I do best, and I will come out with a purchase order or a sale or a commitment to allow us to be a direct supplier into them, into that OEM. And it may well be the case. They may be fortunate, they may be in the right place at the right time, and they may be talking to the relevant person that can give that commitment, but in reality, that doesn't often happen. It takes time to be a supplier here, and I'm sure it applies in the US market in no different terms. And if you take the view that, well, okay, I'll go down the supply chain, I'll go to the first tier and second tier, you become known, you become a credible organization, and the OEM starts to know you rather than simply knocking at the door and getting the keys thrown at you straight away. So we often refer to this as a supply chain brick wall. Organizations come to Westworld and they say, hey, Guy, well, we've been to a supplier seminar, we've talked to the indirect procurement people in an OEM. Hey, they've asked us to upload our material onto a procurement tool, which we've done. We've put some presentation material in there. We've put our quality approvals in there. In actual fact, we don't understand because nothing's happened. And it happens regularly, and I'm sure we've all done it, and I will continue to do it. But we sit down and have to go through with them and say, well, maybe you need to talk to the person that can make the decision, and maybe they don't have the contact that can help them through that supply chain environment. So, access strategies could include, and as I alluded to before, the development of the process. You could seriously consider employing a local representative to act as your front end in the European market. They will have the knowledge, or they ought to have the knowledge. They may well have the contacts, and if they don't have the direct contacts, they know who do. They may well know the competitors in the current marketplace, and they should have the critical infrastructure within Europe to support your development activities. And or you could consider being here yourself, establishing your own presence and marketing yourself into the OEMs and the supply chain. And once you've done all that, you might become a niche supplier. It may well, you might be fortunate, and Rolls-Royce will welcome you with open arms, and Airbus may have just an opportunity that you can help them deliver on a particular platform. But as I alluded to before, and I will say it again, the current incumbent suppliers may be the best place to go. They may be competitors to you, but they may well have a need for a US position, and so would be more than happy to enter into some sort of constructive working relationship. Or you might be able to leverage opportunities through through European programs you're currently working on in Europe. And so you can get through into that supply chain through the work you're currently doing. And then there are one or two minor things that we'd like to cover with you. Whether you have the workload commitments in your own home country, which means that knocking on the European Aerospace door is a good time to do it today. We have an organization that we've been working with for some months now, and they have a very needy US client that continues for them to be with them on a regular basis. And I think they would readily admit they probably don't have the management time or the sales time. They may not have the patience and the financial infrastructure to be here as much as they would like to be. So seriously consider, firstly, whether you have the ability in your own organization to support all of the above. Do your products sit on the US munitions list? Do they have ITAR regulations? And do you need export licenses? which is something that we at Westworld have had challenges to work around? Do you have the incumbent quality approvals to actually get into the marketplace, such as AS 9001 Revision C or various NADCAP approvals? And once you've been through all that lot, then you will face the incumbent position of going through a European, supplier process review. And of course, we here in Europe have various languages and different business cultures, which are probably very similar to yours, but we are always slightly different. So, let me be joined by Steve Hoskins. If I introduce Steve, Steve is the General Manager and Head of Procurement for Airbus Simpa. He spent 4 years in that particular role. He spent 2 years as Head of Research and Test and Procurement at Airbus. And previously to that, Head of Engineering Airbus Procurement for something like 6 years between 2002 and 2008. So Steve and I are going to go through a pre-prepared interview process, which I hope you will get some value from. He's going to comment as to some of the things I've said before and either confirm his views or maybe change my mind accordingly. So let me kick off. So Steve, welcome. Would you like to explain what you do in Airbus Simpa and what you do in your current role?
Yeah, thank you, Guy. Well, as Guy's already said, I work for Airbus Simpa, which is a 100% owned subsidiary of Airbus, specialising in product lifecycle management. So we already work, obviously, with Airbus, their risk-sharing partners, their supply base, and the external markets, delivering training, implementing PLM systems. And we're based in the 4 main Airbus countries, so France, the UK, Germany, and Spain, with a turnover of roughly 100 million. And sorry, as Guy said as well, my role is General Manager for the UK, Head of Procurement, and also I'm the Business Development Manager. So experiencing some of the challenges that you are experiencing as well in the aerospace market today.
Okay, thank you. From an Airbus perspective, can you give us a little bit of outline as to what your role and function was as Head of Engineering in the procurement department?
Yeah, sure. Well, you have to understand the evolution of Airbus as well. So my role evolved during that time. Airbus, if you go back around 8 years, was very much the local countries looking after their own requirements. So the French would look after the French and so on. But then we moved more to a transnational role. And this is important to understand when you try and break into, for example, the Airbus market, is that it's now a transnational organisation. So I moved from being responsible for everything within the UK business to being responsible for a section of the engineering services across 4 countries. It then evolved further into what was the ADS group, now renamed the Airbus group. So, in other words, I was responsible for parts of research and test, for example, across Eurocopter, Astrium, Cassidian, the whole range, including Airbus. So, again, it's very much an evolved market, and it's been through a lot of change during that time.
Okay, thank you. And as far as the European aerospace supply chain is concerned, do you have any generic comments as to how it's changed? Some of the Airbus procurement strategies as far as reducing the incumbent supply chain and growing the business based on fewer suppliers that may be more financially viable?
Yes, well, the supply chain, particularly in the engineering services, which was my area, had to evolve with Airbus. So what you found was that Airbus generally went from around 400 suppliers worldwide for engineering services down now to approximately 20. And this really builds on what Guy was saying about the Tier 1, Tier 2 arrangements within the marketplace. So the suppliers had to adapt, and really that was through acquisition, partnerships, mergers. But what the supply chain had to realise was it was no longer being sufficient to be the expert and the best local supplier. You had to be able to supply into each of the different countries, otherwise you wouldn't be able to win the business anymore.
Okay, thank you. As far as Airbus' current procurement policy is concerned, do you see that changing much over the next preceding years? Do you have any general comments as to where you think it may go?
I think there may be a slight rationalisation of the number of suppliers, but I don't think they'll reduce further. It's happening in other areas. For example, in manufacturing now, they are copying the engineering services model. In engineering services, within Airbus, they have something called the E2S list, which is their preferred supplier list where these 20 or so suppliers sit on. They've done exactly the same in IT services and the same now in manufacturing as well. So I see that being an ongoing development. Whichever area you supply into, there will be fewer Tier 1 suppliers, and Airbus expect those Tier 1s to manage more and more of the sub-tier base as well.
Well, look, as far as challenges and opportunities, as far as new potential suppliers concerned, mostly US-based or globally based, are there considerations that our audience should be aware as far as offsets concerned or technology is concerned as far as their presence in the market?
Yeah, I mean, one of the main things with Airbus is they sell most of their products in dollars, so they want to be able to buy a lot of their product in dollars as well. So that is one of the benefits that the US market has. The offset element of it as well is obviously important. But realistically, I still feel that what Guy was saying earlier is probably the best way forward, is that this alliances, partnerships is probably the quickest way forward. Ultimately, you may be able to move more to a Tier 1 after that, but unless you have a unique selling point to technology, maybe on the composite side, which is obviously more and more of the aerospace market, particularly with Airbus, then there is opportunities there.
Okay, fine, great. And as far as US owned SEMs, would you think Airbus as an organisation is the best place for them to go initially, or the first-tier supply chain? I mean, where would you? And as far as the Airbus procurement structure is concerned, I know that EPG, and maybe you'll explain what EPG is, was recently created some 3 or 4 years ago. Can you make a comment about EPG and the procurement structure globally within Airbus?
Yeah, well, to answer the first part of the question, as I've said before, I think that it's difficult to get into Airbus and to sell into Airbus directly. They are looking to reduce their supply base, so unless you have a very unique selling point, I don't think you would be very successful. The procurement organisation in Airbus now is very much transnational, as I've briefly explained. The Airbus headquarters tends to be in France, but there are procurement teams in each of the countries. What happens then is one of those countries will take the lead on a project, and it will be a multifunctional team. So it will be procurement, the technical contacts, quality, other interested areas of the business will make the ultimate decision on who is invited to a call for tender and ultimately assess the bids and then make the decision on who wins the business. So there's not one focal point, but obviously procurement are responsible for managing the supplier base. So unless you have access through that route, then you don't stand much chance of getting on there anyway.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Are there anything that I haven't raised that I ought to raise as far as lessons learned and suppliers failing to adopt suggestions or recommendations that Airbus make to them as far as their approaches to the organisation?
Only really, I think, as I've said before, being the best local supplier is no longer good enough within the supply base for Airbus. You have to be able to cover multiple markets. So effectively, France, Germany, the UK and Spain, but also into Airbus North America, Wichita and Mobile plant as well. Obviously, if you're already supplying into Airbus North America, that could be a good benefit for you.
Okay.
And Airbus, like any major multinational across many countries, is a very political animal, and you need to understand the politics within that and who to approach and how to approach them. So I think that needs to be, challenged carefully.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. All right. Can I now pass over to Robbie Robinson, who's the President and CEO of Westworld Associates, Inc. I think Robbie will join us from his phone somewhere. So, Robbie, if you could take your phone off mute. I have in front of me, and the audience have in front of me, 2 case studies. One is with Farnborough Aerospace, and the second slide, which you haven't yet seen, is with Styco. Are you, Robbie, are you there or not?
I am, Guy, and personally apologize for the background noise, but I am traversing the freeways of Southern California, which can always be exciting on a Friday.
Okay, thank you, Robbie. So can I leave you maybe, we have in front of us your prior airspace slide, and just as a reminder, it talks about the location of prior, the incumbent turnover. It touches upon the skills that prior offer as a supplier. It outlines the aspiration which prior probably gave you when they first approached Westworld Associates Inc., and it outlines the timeline to success or failure that you managed to help them through in the preceding year plus. So could you just sort of run through that for the sake of those that are listening to this webinar?
Yeah, that's fine, Guy. I think first I'll just give everyone a quick overview of Westworld Associates. The company has been in business since 1977. I've been with the company since 1986, and I bought the company in 1990. And the primary business model was to represent firms from the United Kingdom over here into the U.S. aerospace and defense market, very similar to what Westworld Consulting is offering into Europe. It is a much more cost-effective approach to penetrating the U.S. market for the European companies. And we still do that today. I still have a client in the UK and one in France, the rest in the United States. And what you're seeing with the slide on prior, they've been a client to Westworld Associates now for about 2.5 years. Fortunately for me, they were already Airbus approved, the legacy Airbus specs. One thing you need to understand, I mean, we've been focusing a lot on Airbus, but there are other OEMs and companies in Europe, but Airbus have legacy approvals, and then they have approvals for their A350 program. So one of the things that I had to go through with prior is we were targeting Tier 1, not targeting Airbus direct. They're not big enough for Airbus direct. You need to be doing a minimum of 70 to 100 million a year in sales if you want to go into Airbus directly. And I really do recommend, one, you know the people at Airbus and get them to know you, but to work the Tier 1s, it's much easier and probably much more quickly to success route to take than just going directly into Airbus. With prior, we have had success with FACC in Austria on the A350 program, which required us to get additional A350 approvals. One thing to know, in the United States, there are 2 Airbus people that are certified to approve suppliers. This number is going to grow because of the demand. A number of the Tier 1 in Europe, because they get paid in U.S. dollars, they want to hedge the U.S. dollar, so they're putting more and more work into the United States. This saw a real good ramp up back in around 2008 when the exchange rate for the dollar was very weak compared to the euro. So it was advantageous for the Europeans to come to the U.S., and they've continued this march to the United States. As I said, now after it took about 18 months or more for prior to be successful with FACC on A350 work. They have also just recently been awarded work on the new A320neo, which is the new engine option for the A320. And they've also won additional Dassault work from FACC. That being said, we're still talking to Airbus in France, Airbus in Germany, Airbus in the UK. The Tier 1, we're working in France, Germany, Austria, Sweden, the UK, and just recently, as of this week, Airbus military in Spain. So it's just to give you a flavor of the approach that we're taking. Now, I have been focused on the European market since about 2008. I do about 6 trips a year. Unfortunately, Westworld Consulting wasn't around when I first started doing this, so I made the trips over. You have to do these face-to-face meetings. You can't get away with filling out questionnaires and thinking people are going to call you. That just doesn't work in this industry. It's all about relationships. And unfortunately for me, with my background representing UK companies, with my largest client having been British Aerospace, a lot of those guys ended up in senior executive positions at Airbus. So that gave me a little upper hand when I first started going back in marketing into Europe. The other success that I've had is with Styco Industries. These folks provide tubes and pipes, welded assemblies. They're a very niche company, very good at what they do. We've been working with Airbus now for almost 2 years to break into Airbus, and we are in the process of submitting proposals to Airbus Germany and Airbus UK, and now Airbus Military has come to them. We were successful in around September, October last year with BAE Systems on the F-35 program. So we're working with BAE in Salisbury, England, and it's a very large contract for Styco. They had history on the F-35 program, but BAE Systems had never offloaded any of their tube and pipe work on the F-35, so it was a brand new move for them. And we have our hurdles getting through the learning curve of doing business and offloading work, but that relationship is doing better now. Styco's providing them product on time, quality's good. But again, when I go back to the Airbus side, we've been working it almost 2 years now, and over the last 2 months we've been working proposals. So it took a while for Airbus to finally make the move to start outsourcing tube and pipe work outside of their 3 main suppliers in Europe. They have a supplier in Germany, supplier in France, supplier in the UK. They all at one time or another were part of Airbus, and that's where the political side comes in. So there was a number of high-level meetings to get the approval to go ahead and start dual sourcing work to suppliers outside the legacy 3 Airbus locations. So I'll stick on the line if you guys have any questions about doing work in Airbus and working the Farnborough Airshow. I've been going to that show now for 26 years, so it is beneficial to understanding the market. Guy, I'll go ahead and put myself back on mute.
Thank you, Robbie. All right, we'll continue, and we'll shout when we need you. I'm sure we will. Okay, so slide 24, and I apologize. I hope you haven't nodded off. We'll be soon over. So slide 24 just gives you a fairly generic example of programs that are either in the European aerospace market currently or may well be here in the short-term future. And there are there will be opportunities on all those new programs as far as potential new suppliers are concerned, or at least, as Robbie said, to work with the incumbent first-tier and second-tier OEMs. And lastly, before you disappear, let's talk about the Farnborough Airshow. The Farnborough Airshow, as PJ mentioned, kicks off in July in the UK. It is a biennial event with Paris Airshow happening every other year. It is certainly the European's largest aerospace trade show. It talks about an air show, and yes, there is an air display of every day between about 12:30 and 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It is a fantastic opportunity, if you are not in the market, to at least come and have a look, get a feeling for what it looks like, understanding that the majority of the larger OEMs will either be exhibiting or will be walking the corridors. And as far as the show is concerned, it's a good opportunity to meet 3 or 4 or 6 or 8 people that you otherwise would have to spend a lot of time and a lot of money flying around Europe to succeed. Just briefly, Steve, from an OEM's perspective, do you have any particular comments as far as Farnborough is concerned? I mean, I know Airbus use it as a PR platform, but are there any do's and don'ts and tips that you would like to make to the audience from an Airbus employee perspective?
Yes, as you say, Airbus often use it. They stockpile a lot of the big orders that they have with the airlines to announce them as either Farnborough or Le Bourget. But there is as you say, the procurement side of it as well, and meeting the risk-sharing partners and the Tier 1s and Tier 2s. I think it's just important because obviously, as most of these shows are, they're very big, to understand who you need to get to meet and try to arrange as many meetings before you get there. These people normally have a number of meetings already lined up, so it's important to get the network and the contacts organised quickly. We'll be there again this year. We tend to take a corner of the Airbus stand, and it does tend to get very busy and you need to book early. So just make sure you're well organised to take advantage. Okay, great. So let's just finish off by one last slide, I think, before the end. Yes, Farnborough is what it is. If you're considering being a first-time organisation, we would suggest you probably don't need to exhibit. Just walk the corridors and press the flesh. As far as tips are concerned, Monday to Thursday are usually the days which are trade days. Tuesday and Wednesday being the busiest. I think Steve has already outlined, we would suggest from Westworld point of view, or from any point of view, that you do your homework, you understand who's exhibiting, where they are, in which halls, you plan your routes so you're not walking hundreds of miles or tens of miles a day. And if you can arrange meetings before you come with organisations, then do so. Bearing in mind, the Farnborough Air Show is probably no different from various US air shows. It's a very dynamic situation. So if you manage to arrange 6 or 8 meetings and see half of those, you've probably done extremely well. And from support, the US commercial services here in PJ are here to support you, and Westworld are more than happy to answer any questions you may have after the event. So I think we are at the end of the webinar. I didn't know what time we started, but I don't think we're running too far over. So Melissa, if you'd like to take on the Q&A session, then I welcome a breather.
Great, thank you so much, Guy. And operator, could you remind the participants of how they can enter an audio question?
Thank you. At this time, we will begin the question and answer session. To ask a question, please press *1 on your touch-tone phone. Please unmute your phone and record your first and last name clearly when prompted. To withdraw your question, please press *2. Once again, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1 and record your first and last name clearly.
And while we wait for the first question to come in, I'd just like to remind all of the audience participants that if you would like to get in touch with your local U.S. Commercial Service representative, you can go to our website, which is an easy one, www.export.gov, and you can find a listing of all of our local offices. Did we have any questions come in?
Once again, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1 and record your first and last name clearly when prompted. Our first question comes from Luke Gribich. Your line is now open.
Yes, thank you all for presenting this very valuable presentation to us all. I am among the participants that will have a position at Farnborough this year. I'm wondering, you had indicated that the U.S. Commercial Services did have a presence at Farnborough. What is that booth number?
I believe it is Hall 2, Booth A. If you visit our website, we'll have it up on our website.
Very good. Is there anybody in particular that will be there that would be a good point of contact?
You can contact me, PJ Menner. I'm the Aerospace and Defense Specialist here in the London office.
And I will include PJ's contact details in the follow-up email after the webinar.
Very good. It may show me as having provided a second inquiry just because of some technical challenges with accessing this online. Please disregard.
Great, thank you. Melissa, do we have any other questions that have come in?
Currently, there are no more questions in queue, but if you would like to ask a question, please press *1 and record your first and last name clearly when prompted.
Well, if there are no other questions, I would like to thank our speakers very much, Guy, Steve, Robbie, PJ, and James. This was a very informative webinar, and again, we will be sending the webinar out following the presentation. So if any participants do have questions for any of our speakers, you will have their contact details following the webinar. Melissa, I'll do one last check to see if we had any last-minute questions come in.
Currently, there are no questions in queue at this time.
Okay, great. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you for your participation in today's conference. You may now disconnect.